What is the one book every instructional designer should have and why? I am trying to build my resources, so I am especially curious. Kim, fantastic question. Extremely difficult question, as I have a million book recommendations I would love to give you. And depending upon when this video comes out, there could be another new book that comes out. They keep on coming out again and again and again, which is great for our field. But if I had to pick one, I would tell you about the book that I first read as an instructional designer, which is this one, which is called UDL in the Cloud. And this is by Tom Thibodeau and by Dr. Katie Novak. Now, why this book in particular? When I was first getting into this field, I luckily read this book beforehand, and this made me take a different type of mindset of how I was developing my resources at the time. And this makes me think about, how do I design for everybody? How do I provide flexibility? How do I remove barriers? All things I really didn't necessarily think about, because back then, as I was designing some of these resources for the Writing Center, the Peer Tutoring Center, and the online learning communities, I was thinking more about just the content. I wasn't really thinking about the student perspective, the learner's perspective. And this book in particular really changed my mind about how I construct everything. Now, to give you an example of how I still use what I learned about this book, I still use this information to this day. So, to give you an example, is that I was creating leadership courses for MIT, and it came up where some of the students were talking about in the exit interview. So, in this pilot program that I do, and they were talking about how they wanted to be more engaged in the course content, but they didn't know how. Now, this is fascinating because they didn't have an answer to the problem. They were just telling me their problem. And I was like, okay, do you want more readings? They're like, no. Like, okay, what if you had more videos? Like, no. Okay, if I made you more practice questions and reflections and applications and problems, would you want to do those? They're like, no. So then I said, well, why? What's the problem? And they said, well, our problem is time. I don't have the time to do this. So then I asked them to think about their day. And I said, when do you have time in your day to do more with the course? And they said, well, it's impossible. But if I had to map it out, I have about 40 to 45 minutes in my commute going to work. And if you could somehow put something in the course in that time frame, well, then I would do it. So I'm like, so what you're saying is that if I make a podcast for your commute, you would actually listen to it? And they all said yes. So then here I go. I'm like, all right, let's make a podcast for these courses. Don't know how this is going to go. Never done this before. And it really became a humongous success. The podcasts themselves have like 2,000 downloads right now with, no promotions, no nothing. It's just embedded within the courses themselves. But then tying this all back into UDL, I was thinking about ways to create content that could then be usable in a different way. But then I didn't just give it to the students who asked for it. I gave it to everybody because, of course, that is the whole point of trying to think about designing something in a universal fashion. How do you design for everybody? And that is something that I still take with me to this day. I still use in all the courses that I design, and what I still try to do when I practice everything I learned about from this framework. Now, there is a new book that's coming out in May that I do want you to be on the lookout for. I was really fortunate enough to be able to read it ahead of time, and it was awesome. And I highly encourage you to do the same. This book is all about blended learning. It's from Dr. Novak and from Dr. Tucker. They took the concepts of UDL, blended learning, put them all together, and it's just awesome. So be on the lookout for that book. At the time of this recording, it is titled UDL and Blended Learning, Thriving in Flexible Learning Landscapes. It's forward thinking, written by smart people. Buy the book.